Welcome back into the 14. I'm Chris Lee, your host. Blake Lovell with me today. And Blake, we've got a lot of ground to cover. Basketball is what you and I usually do. Our man Barry Allen has got all kinds of crazy duties this week in his other gig, doing scorekeeping for basketball. He's got a state tournament to cover, so we're giving him a pass this week on baseball. We will plug him back in next week. But you and I are going to cover some baseball too. And boy, we've got a lot to talk about. The SEC has a great start to its baseball season for the most part. A couple of warts in there, but I think for the most part, the league was perceived as the number one league in the land. This first 5 days of baseball did nothing to change that. Oh, by the way, we had some unexpected basketball games to discuss from Tuesday night with some things we didn't see coming. So all sorts of stuff to talk about on the 14 today.
Yeah, as we said when we started this thing, it's a good time to start it because there's a lot going on. And we talked about sort of the stretch run for basketball and with baseball getting started. There's plenty happening. And, man, you talk about a good start for baseball, like you said. Certainly, you and I, located in Nashville, Vanderbilt off to a nice start. I know, we talked about over the weekend what the SEC did to the Big 12. We're getting some wins there. I know Ole Miss has moved up to number one in D1's. Top 25, Arkansas second, Vanderbilt third. So no surprise there, kind of with the SEC leading the way right now based on this early start.
It would be easy to take shots at the Big 12 today. And I'm not here to do that because it's a good baseball league. But the SEC wins 8 games of the 9 that it plays against the Big 12 out in Texas this weekend. And look, I think that says more about the SEC than it does the Big 12. All those games involving Big 12 teams were top 10 teams. And the SEC, frankly, Mississippi State loses a 3-2 game, and that close to being perfect. I mean, and it's not like the scores were 12-2. Let's be fair here. But seeing the league do that to 3 really good teams, almost Omaha-level teams in Texas, in their backyard, that was super impressive.
No, I thought just, watching a variety of those games, and as we both talked about, we're just juggling, kind of throwing back and forth. You've got basketball games going on Saturdays, and knowing, kind of with baseball, the way things started. But, I mean, just watching some of those games, like you said, I mean, we seemingly go into every season now in SEC baseball, and we kind of know what to expect. You're going to have, all the different teams that are going to have a chance. I mean, there's going to be, half the league at least having an opportunity to really do some special things. And I think you could see that kind of with the way things started. Although I know, Chris, that the one team that everybody was talking about heading into the start of baseball season was Florida. And I think the way that started for them, getting off to a 1-2 start, losing that series to Miami. I know that especially that Friday night game, the pitching, there were some certainly some questionable things, and a lot of people were pointing out kind of the way that played out for Florida, and that I thought that was an interesting start to the season, certainly for the Gators as well.
Yeah, Florida's having some pitching issues, and the weekend, frankly, didn't go nearly as smoothly for the Gators as I thought it would. And frankly, there were some hiccups on Monday against Jacksonville too, although Florida won that game. I want to table that for a minute because I want to talk about Ole Miss. This is the team that you look at the pollsters, and I think the consensus shaped up as Florida and then Vandy and Ole Miss in some order. You look at the polls. I think some teams, probably more pollsters, had Ole Miss a notch ahead of Vandy than the other way around. But Ole Miss now the number one team by D1 baseball. Frankly, it's deserving. And you look at the Rebels, I think we thought Gunnar Hoagland, Doug Nikhazy were going to be the 2 guys who really carried them, but Hoagland was just okay. He gave up 3 runs and 5 1/3 in his start. Nikhazy kind of got bombed, giving up 3 in an inning and 2/3. I mean, bombed is a little bit harsh, but you look at the ERA at 16.20, that doesn't look that's not easy on the eyes. I don't think that's a terrible – that can happen to a lot of good pitchers, right? But I guess this is what I'm getting at, okay? Ole Miss goes in against 3 great teams, comes out with 3 wins, and in the midst of that, its best 2 pitchers don't really show out the way they're capable. But you look at it, and it's just committee. Taylor Broadway, a lot of guys in that bullpen threw really well. You look up at the end of the weekend, that team's got a 2.67 ERA. By the way, no unearned runs either. So I look at Ole Miss and what it did this weekend, and I was high on the Rebels to begin with, but I think right now, Ole Miss being number one seems like the right call based on the early body of the work. Oh, by the way, let's also mention Ole Miss won, I think it was 16 in a row to end last year. So this team is on a 19-game winning streak. Florida was everybody's consensus number one, but I think Ole Miss right now, to me, is the team that deserves the top spot. I haven't seen the consensus of the polls. D1 is the one I like the most. They've got him there, and I would tend to agree.
Yeah, I just I kind of glanced at watching some of their games over the weekend, and it seemed like every time I turned over, I was I'd flip between something either on Saturday and kind of watching basketball, and then watching on Sunday some of the games. It seemed like anytime I was watching Ole Miss, it was just strikeout after strikeout after strikeout. It just seemed like every time I turned in, all of a sudden they're striking someone out. I know we talked about. I mean, they had 16 strikeouts on Sunday against Texas Tech. They had 13 against TCU in that win the day before on Saturday. So no, I mean they're loaded. I mean, just watching them, as we said, it's one of those things where it seems like in SEC baseball every year you try to find what are some of those little things that separate these teams that all are kind of bunched together, in the top 10 or the top 5 like they are right now with, like we said, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, I know in the top 3, and then you got Mississippi State there at 5. But, it's just it's one of those things where I don't know sometimes like how you separate some of these teams, but man, that pitching for Ole Miss, certainly all the strikeouts, like you said, that was something where even just being able to do what they did to start the season, that was pretty impressive.
I'm not shocked that Arkansas played well this weekend. I'm a little surprised that it swept Texas Tech, Texas, and TCU. Again, those were 3 teams that were top 10 coming into the weekend. I'm not surprised that Arkansas scored some runs, too. It got 21 in 3 days. I am surprised that it gives up 9 to Texas Tech on Friday, and then it shuts out Texas and gives up 1 to TCU. I didn't see that coming because I think we looked at the lineup. We said Casey Opitz, Robert Moore, Christian Franklin, all those hitters that if you followed the league for a couple of years, but the pitching was the issue. It looked to me like a piece it together job for the Razorbacks, and maybe it will be, but to see that team pitch the way it did on that stage was really a welcome sign if you are an Arkansas fan.
Yeah, and I know, like you kind of going back to the season preview we did on the podcast, you and Barry, it's like that was the one thing we kept discussing was just sort of just the pitching. Like you said, you just know what you're getting in terms of some of the pitching around this league. And, that's another thing, too, that I've always just kind of been fascinated with is just how – you put together obviously some of these staffs in the SEC, and you just see all the capable talent. We know there's a lot of guys that are going to be playing at the next level, but it's just, you look at a team like Arkansas too, and like we said, it's just, man, that those little things like that to be able to, have that type of pitching against Texas, and all those little things. There's just, it seems like all these teams near the top, like all those little things like that, they just have those different elements that they can do to kind of put them near the top. And that's why, right now, as we said, I mean, you're just looking at teams like Ole Miss and Arkansas and kind of what they're capable of, but certainly an impressive start for them as well.
Mississippi State was the team or one of the teams that I thought had the pitching, and State threw pretty well. I mean, it gives up 3 runs and a loss to TCU. Other than that, it wins the other 2 games, beats Texas 8-3, Texas Tech 11-5. But again, I mean, goodness, this is just a theme. There's so many arms in this league this year, and I don't know that they got, again, like, I don't know that the stellar innings came from the place that maybe you figured going in. That rotation with Sarah and Toll and those guys is awfully talented, but I think it was their bullpen that really came through for them in a lot of that weekend out in Arlington.
Yeah, I mean, it's that theme, right? It's the theme that you kind of look at there, and you see kind of what these teams. Again, you look at the pitching and all those other things. But I was going to ask you, from that weekend in Arlington. I mean, we talked about these different teams and what the SEC did. against the Big 12. But, if there's one thing that maybe stood out to you the most, we just talked about the teams that certainly have gotten wins there, and you talk about Mississippi State and what Arkansas and Ole Miss have done. Was there one thing to you? I mean, just aside from the pitching, because as we said, that's kind of what we talked about. It was something that was a recurring theme, but was there anything, maybe just one thing that you felt like stood out above the rest, just in terms of that entire weekend there in Arlington?
Well, you took my choice out of my hands because I would have said pitching. Again, to me, I did not expect to see Arkansas go in and do what it did. And again, a lot of it committee. You look at it, and Pallett and Bolden and Lockhart and those kids all throw 4+ innings. Zebulon Vermillion throws 4 in his start. And again, I think that's the way. And I'm not singling out Arkansas here, because you're going to see a lot of teams do this early, but it's hard to pitch to elite teams and find that many arms who can get out. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and not answer your question the way that you asked it, to buy myself time to think about how I'd answer that.
Well, I mean, again, like we said, I think the obvious is probably the pitching. When we pointed out the different guys that, stepped up in different spots, and you just talking about, we mentioned specifically looking at Arkansas's, shutout win against Texas and all these other things. So I think that's the easy answer. But I was just trying to, again, because I'm always fascinated just by, what are some of those things that you feel like are going to be able to separate some of those teams at the top? Because we know, like, all these teams are capable of being able to win a lot of games this year, potentially get to Omaha, all that. I just, and what can we really tell from 3 or 4 games to start the season, right? It's a long season. So I didn't know if there was anything that maybe just caught your eye right away that you said, oh, well, maybe we were right about this, maybe we were wrong about this, some little aspect like that of any of those teams that played in Arlington.
Well, I think I've got my answer, because this was not one that I can answer easily, because again, I like all those teams, right? I have no issue with any of them being preseason top 10. So the bar was set pretty high to begin with. I guess it is seeing State score 21 runs out there, because not that they don't have talent, right? But when you lose Jordan Westberg and some of the guys that they lost after last year, that infield was just a kind of one of the all-time best in the league that they had together for a couple of years there. You don't lose kids like that and it not leave a mark. Look, having said that, they've got kids like Rowdy Jordan and Josh Hatcher and Tanner Allen who've been there a while. But I think the thing was to see them go out and you look down the lineup and it was balanced, man. I mean, they had 4 guys post 400+ on base percentages for the weekend. Luke Hancock and Rowdy Jordan both crushed the ball out there with a couple of home runs. I think that was the thing. Like, if you had said Mississippi State goes out to Arlington and scores 8 runs for the weekend, I don't know that it would have really changed my opinion of State that much, because again, you build in that many new bats when you lose All-American caliber players, and you're going to struggle, especially against some elite teams away from home. To see State hit the ball that way, I think, was the one thing that, along with Arkansas's pitching, stood out to me.
That's a good answer. Look, I put you on the spot, so I thought that was a good recovery, a good answer, because, I mean, the easy one was the pitching, but that's a good point. I mean, that's a lot of runs to start the season, so I like that answer. So,
well, and I think the negative surprise for the weekend, well, there were 2 of them, and you mentioned one of them in Florida. The other one would be A&M, and I'll get to A&M later. I did get the chance to watch the Aggies some this weekend, which was something I wanted to do because I felt like that was the team I knew the least about. Watching Florida's bullpen continually melt down, and the weirdest thing was, okay, they win that Friday night game against Miami, which they have just flat out dominated. And so I'm watching them on Saturday, and the kid they've got in, whose name escapes me for the minute, can't throw a strike. I mean, he's not like hitting guys and throwing wild pitches back to the backstop all over. He might have had a couple of those, but he's trying to nibble and he's not finding the zone. And Miami can hit, man. You had Adrian Del Castillo on that team, who is maybe the best college hitter in the country, according to some pro scouts. And that's just not a lineup you want to mess around with. And I'm watching O'Sullivan just sit on his hands, I guess. Maybe that's being hard. And maybe this is a place where you want to find out who can handle it and who can't. But he's got a pitcher on the hill who just isn't throwing strikes. And he's got his closer parked in the bullpen and he's not warming him up. And the guy walks 5 guys in that inning and hits another guy. And all of a sudden, they give up I think it was 4 runs in the ninth, and the game's tied. They finally bring Ben Specht in. He gets that last out, and they go to extras where they lose it again because Jordan Butler walked a couple of kids, or maybe walked one and hit one, something like that. And Butler pitched pretty well. But again, this is a staff with Florida that you thought was – it's not Vanderbilt in terms of I don't like Florida's weekend rotation as much as I like Vandy's. I mean, Rocker and Leiter, I mean, I don't care who you are. I'm going to take that against anybody in the country. But the thing with the Gators was you've got a rotation that came back. They were all guys that, might have been gone under a different draft scenario. And Florida's always got as much as anybody. Vandy might have 1 or 2 arms that are the best in the league. But the Gators, when you get to guys 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that's where Florida usually gets an advantage on people. And to see Florida, a lot of those arms that usually contribute for them really struggle. And by the way, Franco Alamon is the guy whose name I was trying to think of, who melted down in the ninth of that Saturday game. I did not expect to see a Florida team that had an edge and experience there really have a bullpen that let the team down. That was probably the biggest negative surprise to me of the weekend.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up is when you watched how the games played out in some of those, but if you also just kind of look at it, you look at how many runs they gave up just in the ninth inning. And then beyond that, right, just not even, we're talking about the Miami series now, like even going into that game against North Florida, what was it? They gave up, I think, 3 runs in the ninth in that one. I mean, they still won, but like still that has to be a bit of a concern when you look at it just on paper and say, okay, well, one game, they give up 4 runs in the ninth, even though that they found a way to win that game. And then, of course, we talk about the way the other game played out in terms of giving up 3 in the ninth. That game goes into extra innings, and they lose that there. So, I mean, there's no doubt, like that's been a trend in these first 4 games for the most part, just in terms of looking at how many runs, they're giving up late. And like you said, the bullpen and the questions about that. So I think that's certainly a glaring thing. I mean, as I said, I know it's hard to kind of pick out things that may be a trend for the entire season just through the first 3 or 4 games of a season. But I think with the kind of as glaring as it was for Florida, I thought that was something that certainly stood out from the weekend.
Well, ERAs can be very deceptive early on. Florida's is 5.18. It's going to come down. But what I like to look at, and sometimes you will see teams rectify this over the season. And we live in Nashville. We've seen Vanderbilt. I've seen a couple of really good Vandy staffs that had trouble throwing strikes in February and March, and those things came around. But to look at the Gators, and after 40 innings pitched, they have walked or hit 33 batters and struck out 35. That is not the stat I expected to see. And I don't know. I don't know if it's too early to be concerned. I mean, we went into the season saying, okay, Florida is the deserved number 1 team because of the way it ended last season and because of all the guys who were coming back. If you want a good recipe for a successful season, bring back a lot of guys and especially bring back a lot of guys who've had success. So I had no issue with the Gators being number 1 by everybody, even though you've got 11, maybe 12 teams that are regional caliber in this league, half of which most people think are good enough to host. But that does give me a little cause for concern. I want to watch that and see how that resolves, because if that number doesn't get straightened out, by the first weekend or 2 of conference play, I think we really have to revise our expectations. Again, that is wildly premature. But I want to see how those numbers resolve in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say that we're recording here Wednesday morning. They play North Florida again tonight, actually, and then they've got the the weekend series against Samford. Then after that, they've got midweek game against Florida Atlantic, then a weekend series against Florida A&M. So you would think that some of that may correct itself. But as you said, it's something certainly worth watching. I mean, again, I don't know how much you can put into it just yet, but I think when you just look at the scores, you look at how many runs they've given up, especially as you say, look at the walk strikeout discrepancy there. There's a lot to take away, I think, just for Florida. Even though, I mean, Miami, good team. So I think there are certainly some things to look at moving forward with the Gators.
I want to table our disappointments to later in the podcast. And again, A&M is going to be squarely in the crosshairs on that one. Although the Aggies were not, a top 25 team by most people. So I don't know that it was totally out of line. I'm trying to think, though. It's hard to pick a storyline beyond that. I mean, Vanderbilt swept Wright State. I guess that's a good one, okay? The Commodores, goodness gracious, you talk about depth of arms. They struck out, 31 guys in 2 9-inning games on Monday. And again, Vandy didn't play Friday, Saturday, Sunday because of snow on the field. And you see that start. Kumar Rocker comes out just guns a-blazing. Then he has to leave in the fifth after he walks 2 guys on 8 pitches. But strikes out 8, beyond that, gets the win. Jack Leiter probably looked even better. That the kid's got like 4 or 5 pitches that he throws, and first inning didn't need anything other than a fastball. The radar gun on TV was showing 100. I think that was hot, but they couldn't hit it. And then he started mixing in the other pitches, and I mean, good luck to you.
Yeah,
I think, there's a lot of good storylines here. We've got 4 or 5 other teams to talk about, but seeing Vandy come out and its pitching be what we thought it would be, and I think they threw 8 guys in those 2 games. Chris McIlvain, the only one who gave up a run. And I mean, pick a contestant in the beauty pageant, because there's some teams that played well, but I think that's maybe the next one is what Vandy did with its arms. And then seeing a couple of kids like Jason Gonzalez and Isaiah Thomas smack home runs. To me, Gonzalez was a big story because he sat out last year. And that's a team that we've said if they just hit decently and get a little pop, they're going to be everything people thought they were. And you saw some of that. Now, game 2, they win 1-0 and didn't hit the ball really well. But I thought that Vandy being what we thought it would be, that was a good start for them.
Yeah, I mean, Rocker and Leiter, they're just on another level. I think you just see these guys, and my goodness, like again, and you've said it before, like you would put those guys up against anyone in the country, and I think you just watch them pitch, and it's just these guys have all the command, all the confidence. Like it's incredible to kind of think where they're at. But I know something else you brought up too, and you mentioned Gonzalez and Isaiah Thomas and what they were able to do hitting the ball. But I know something you talked about too, heading into the season, was going to be, the experience factor too for Vanderbilt, knowing just in terms of the lineup, not having a ton of experience, and just maybe what that could equal, and maybe I don't know whether it's inconsistency or things like that could potentially creep up for a team like this. But I think if you just watch these first 2 games, and again, sample size is important, but that they did a lot of things well, and I think the experience thing will be something to watch too moving forward. But my goodness, with that pitching, this is just this is one of those teams that they're going to be able to win these 1-0 type games. Like they're not going to have to score 7-8 runs every single night to be able to win these games when they have these guys leading the way in their pitching staff. So just an impressive start for them. Don't think that's too surprising for sure. And it's just another team that adds to the loaded SEC right there at the top.
Well, speaking of experience for them, I don't have the number in front of me. I didn't think Gonzalez would start at third for them. The talk was it was going to be Parker Nolan, who they put in the DH spot. But the lineup without Gonzalez, and this flipped when they put him in, but I did a little research. Austin Martin, who graduated and went, 5th or 6th overall to Toronto, had more starts leaving Vandy last year. And again, he didn't even get a full third year than the whole lineup that they thought they would put on the field for game 1 had. Now, again, they flipped Gonzalez and put him in there. They put Nolan at DH. So I think once you adjust for that, then that lineup had like 30 more starts than Austin Martin had. But that tells you where their starting point is in terms of experience.
Yeah, and that's, we always talk about that, whether we're talking about baseball, basketball, like everything. It's just, experience certainly can play a factor in terms of that. But I did, I watched both those games against Wright State, and I just looked up and said, man, they've got another one of these teams that with the pitching is going to carry everything. As you said, maybe not a ton of experience in terms of some of the teams that Tim Corbin has had there, but that pitching is going to be hard to kind of break through against, even though, there's a lot of good bats in the SEC too. But just with Rocker and Leiter and just, I don't know, like these two guys are just, they're pros. Like they're pros. And I think with them leading the way, it's going to be hard to beat Vanderbilt in a series just because, that you're going against those two guys. So
I guess for my next pick, and again, we've got 3 or 4 teams that played decently well that we haven't gotten to. Maybe my next story would be Alabama. And I know the Crimson Tide haven't played a murderer's row of schedule yet, but McNeese in the Southland is a decent program. Went to a regional. Last time there was a regional is, I think, a 3. And Jacksonville State, I think, is favored to win the OVC, which Alabama beat yesterday. I think the thing for Alabama, they ended the season last year 16-1, and the expectation was they thought they had a pretty good team, but we never got to the SEC to see that. And we've seen that happen before, right? A team will run off a 12-1, 15-2 kind of start, and then get to the league and they hit the meat grinder and it falls apart. And so that's what we don't know about Alabama. But all you can do is play the games in front of you. And you look at what the Tide did. I mean, Connor Prelip was everything we thought he'd be. Goes 5 scoreless, strikes out 8. Chase Lee, their closer, was really good again. They had, again, like some of these other teams, 7, 8 arms that threw really well in relief this week. And then you look at the bats. We knew that Owen Diodate would be a pretty good player. He had a couple homers this weekend, 471 on base, 769 slugging through through 4 games. Sam Prater, their catcher, didn't get off to a great start, but did hit a couple of home runs that helped out. Zane Denton, who is from our neck of the woods, I saw that kid play in high school. And again, if you're just listening to us, we both are based in Nashville. That kid hit a couple of home runs, including one on his birthday. Peyton Wilson hit a couple of bombs. I think with Alabama recently, the pitching staff a lot of times has been good enough or close to good enough, and the bats just weren't. And so, again, keeping in mind it's not an SEC schedule that team's played, but I think seeing Alabama flash some power and its pitching throw the way we thought it could, I think was a nice little story and a good start for the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I watched a good bit of that game on, what was it, I don't remember if it was the Friday or Saturday game, the one where Denton hit the walk-off homer. That was where McNeese got up early. I think they were up 3-0 going into the 7th, I believe. That was a fun game to watch. And then, like you said, I mean, just to have the bats emerge as they did in those final 3 innings of that game in particular, that is something too where I think, you kind of mentioned with Alabama, they're one that, what exactly do you take away, from these first several games, which has kind of been the theme we've talked about, but still, I mean, you could certainly see some things with this team. I mean, I thought just watching them play, specifically, again, I got to watch a little bit of the other games, but, watching the majority of that game that they had, that 4-3 win against McNeese, like I said, with the one where didn't hit the homer. I don't know why I can't remember right now if that was that Saturday or Friday. It's bugging me. I can't remember exactly.
I think that was Saturday.
Okay, yeah. Saturday. That's what I thought because I knew it was after. I want to say that was after the Alabama's basketball game against Vanderbilt. I want to say that's when I was watching some of that. So, but yeah, no, I mean, I think Alabama, another one of those teams, like you said, that maybe it will take a little bit longer to maybe fully figure out in terms of what they're going to be this season versus some of the others we've talked about, certainly. But a nice start. Anytime you can start the way they have, you'll take 4 wins to start the season in your first 4 games. So
the other one I was toying with bringing up next, and I deferred to Alabama because they played 4 games and won 4, but Kentucky, of course, didn't get its opening series that got COVIDed out against North Carolina, whatever our made-up verb for that will be. But Kentucky finally plays Miami of Ohio, and a weird stat Barry Allen came up with on the website. I did not realize Kentucky had not opened at home since 1983. That's crazy for an SEC team. Of course, That's the most northbound school. That and Missouri are the two teams that are going to be affected by weather probably more than anybody. You might throw Tennessee in there, but I think those two first. But look, Kentucky lost a player a month ago.
Yeah.
Died unexpectedly. You and I were around the Vanderbilt program in 2016 when we saw that team lose Donnie Everett. Now, the dynamic was a little different because Donnie Everett was supposed to be, a top maybe 2-3 pick in the draft when he came out after his junior year. And the kid turned down a couple million out of high school, but that program was never right for a couple of years after that. Now, the circumstances were a little different, but we both seen what happens when you lose a player on your team who's beloved. And to see Kentucky respond the way it did in an opening day win, that's one thing. I look at a couple other things. I mean, the pitching. Kentucky's kind of the reverse Alabama, right? Alabama's had the arms lately, but not enough bats. Kentucky has had the bats, but the pitching gets sideways once you get into SEC play. Now, that may be the case again this year, but Ryan Hagenel, who was the freshman who pitched that first game, was one of the more highly regarded arms I think they've signed in years. He goes 4 shutout, strikes out 6, hits a guy and gives up a hit, goes, again, 4 scoreless. And then you look at the end, Mason Hazelwood, another one of their big arms. He goes 2 scoreless at the end of the game and strikes out 5 to preserve that one. Kentucky gets 3 home runs in between. TJ Collette hits 1, which is no surprise. But I just thought with the emotional element of that game based on that team's last few weeks, and this wasn't a thing that happened like in September, and they had some time to get over. I think this was in January. So I thought that seeing Kentucky, not just on the baseball end, come out in a way that we hoped we'd see. We wanted to see the pitching be a little better. And again, one game's all you can do. But I think you add in the death of Ben Jordan too, and Kentucky playing its first one after that with, I guess it being a big deal where they honored him and those kind of things. That's a hard game to win sometime, no matter who you play. And I thought how the Wildcats handled all that and how they played that game, to me, was a big story.
Yeah, I mean, just to, like you said, to start the game the way they did, in that first inning, and then, you kind of, I don't know, like the relief isn't the right word, but just I think to get off to that kind of start, probably knowing everything that had sort of been building up heading into that game, kind of knowing the emotions that were going to be surrounding it, that certainly I'm sure helped, just to be able to have a start like that. Whereas, if you get off to a slow start, then again, you're playing with all the emotions too, and you're trying to just, play a baseball game and knowing that, this is still something that's going to be on your mind throughout the entirety of it. And it's going to be on your mind probably throughout the entirety of the season for a team like this. Again, knowing kind of what happened. So I did too. I was thinking back, you mentioned the Donnie Everett thing, and I think I was writing for you still at that point at Vandy Sports, and being able to, it's fun. I mean, it's not, just I still have that story that I wrote on it pinned at the top of my Twitter account, and that's been 5 years now, which is just incredible to think of. But like it was, it's always just there's no way to kind of know, I think, how a team could respond, because again, we're talking about like, college kids. We're talking about a situation where, you're losing a teammate, you're losing a friend, all these other things. It's just, it's impossible kind of to know how the reaction could be, because, it is something that's a little bit bigger than just the game that you're playing. And I can remember back, to that Vanderbilt situation, and, what was it? I want to say, was it the regional that year? Was it Xavier? Maybe someone else was in there, but I can just remember, like you said, it just didn't feel the same. Like it was different. Like there were just things that were different. You could tell, and it's going to be different. Like I'm sure for Kentucky, like this is going to be something where, hey, it's not going to feel the exact same. They're going to be, obviously you're going to be thinking about this again for a long time. But to be able to get that start, to get a win, which in the grand scheme of things, I know it's a win, but still, I think just starting the game the way that they did, you talked about the home runs, that's a nice start. And I think, again, knowing the emotions that were going to be surrounding it, that's certainly something that they can at least lean on here moving forward.
Yeah, and the Vandy story we're talking about, that was the 2016 Nashville Regional, which contained Vanderbilt, Xavier, Washington, and UCSB. UCSB ended up winning that regional and going to Louisville and pulling a shocker there and going to Omaha. But yeah, I mean, Donnie Everett drowns on a Thursday night. It just casts a pall over the whole weekend. They start the regional late. Vanderbilt, I think, had beaten Xavier something like 25-4 in a 3-game series to start the year, and loses, I don't know, 13-1 or something like that. I mean, it's one of those things that, like, you're at the ballpark, you're like, okay, this is, the kids on that team didn't sleep, and I mean, it was the most nightmarish thing I've ever covered. But yeah, I mean, it can leave a mark, and everybody handles it differently. But I don't envy anybody trying to play baseball under the circumstances that Kentucky did on Monday. Let's move on and stay in the East a minute. Tennessee had an interesting weekend because it goes to Georgia Southern and really doesn't hit very well. I don't know what the stats were with runners in scoring position and clutch situations, but the Vols must have hit off the charts because I think they had a 5-something OPS for the weekend and scored more runs than they should have. And then, of course, yesterday, Tennessee just smacks, who was it?
Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Yes, okay. Not a team that's going to be the caliber of what Tennessee's going to see. But I think with Tennessee, they've got a little bit of power with Jordan Beck and Drew Gilbert, not maybe names that a lot of SEC fans are familiar with. Max Ferguson had a really good day in the midweek. That was to be expected. And I think, though, they're pitching. They've lost some arms. And, of course, they lost their main one. Garrett Crochet was picked by the White Sox in the top half of the first round a year ago. And some veterans that the Vols have, like a guy like Will Heflin. Not overpowering, but has been around a lot. Sean Hunley's pitched a lot of innings in this league. Camden Sewell's been around a while. Jackson Leith, a name that a lot of fans know. But Tennessee, again, it's just kind of a committee approach. But the Vols have struck out 43 and walked 7 through 4 games. And again, not murderer's row opposition. But I think we felt like Tennessee lost some bats. Solari, and they had another kid drafted whose name escapes me at the moment, but and lost some arms in Crochet. I think I had some questions about the Vols on both sides of the ball, but to see Tennessee go in and end up 4-0 after its first 4 games, and especially to pitch and to hit the zone the way it did, I think that's a story too.
Yep, quality start. I thought for them. I got to see a little bit of their game. Again, these days just run together now. I feel like when we have baseball and basketball coming along, I don't even know what day it is sometimes. But I know I watched one of their games. I want to say that may have been the Saturday game too against Georgia Southern. I think it was the one they won 5-3. But then again, now that I think about it, they won the first 2 5-3. So it could have been either one. That's a mystery that we will have to figure out. But yeah, I mean, I think Tennessee. What was it? They were picked. Was Tennessee picked 3rd in the East in the preseason poll? I think they were right there with South Carolina, Georgia, kind of in that same mix in terms of the votes and all that. So I don't know. I thought it was going to be kind of interesting to see kind of how Tennessee performs here over the next month or so, because I just thought it was kind of curious to see maybe what the trajectory is going to be, just kind of with the program moving forward. Obviously, we've talked about over the past couple of years, well, what's maybe what's that next step for Tennessee, and what's kind of the next step for the program in terms of being able to maybe take that leap up to joining some of those names and teams that we've talked about here at the top throughout this podcast. And I guess when you look at it just in terms of what they could do this season, I'm kind of fascinated by them too. They're one that I kind of circled in the preseason, just kind of studying some of these teams, just trying to figure out, okay, what exactly do you make of Tennessee? As you said, some of the guys that they lost from last season. But they're one that I've got my eye on because I really am. I'm kind of curious to see how they continue to play here moving forward. And like we said, I mean, we're not probably going to be able to take much away from their game again today against Arkansas Pine Bluff, but I'm at least curious in terms of where they go from here.
I'll tell you what's difficult about covering this season, and it's again back to last year, just so many unknowns and so many names that are playing key roles that we don't like. I feel like if we were doing this any other year, some stuff would be easier to talk about because they're names you know and kids you've seen. This year, it's like, okay, well, this JUCO kid did this or this freshman did that, and they're not really names we know outside of maybe reading it somewhere in a preview, and that's been. I'm looking forward to getting a couple more weeks into this where we have a handle on some of these new faces. By the way, one guy like that, a name you don't know for Tennessee, I meant to mention Chad Dallas. I watched a little bit of his start. Again, I think this was Saturday, might have been Sunday, but he had a no-hitter, going into the sixth, I think, and then gave up a couple hits. Like the line does not tell you how well he pitched because his final line was 6 1/3, 2 runs, both earned, 7 strikeouts and a walk. But I think the only 2 runners he gave up or 2 of the 3 scored. So that's a little bit misleading in terms of when you look at the box score line. I thought he was better than that. But, the guy we've short-sighted so far is Cocky over at Carolina.
Yeah.
Have you seen what that team's been doing in terms of hitting?
I was gonna bring that up too in terms of I was talking about kind of what the preseason predictions were and all that, and I just said Tennessee was picked ahead of South Carolina in the East, and I think Georgia. They're very similar in terms of the votes, but that's what I was going to ask you. It's like you kind of look at the way South Carolina started here, and what is it? They put up at least 12 runs in the 3 of their first 4 games, and that's what I was going to say. Man, that's a bit of a statement to start the year off with. There, putting up some runs.
Yeah, no, look, the ball can fly out of that ballpark at times, and it sure sounds like it was this weekend too. They've got, I'm gonna look. They got 14 home runs in 4 games, I think.
It's insane.
I'm looking this up to verify as we're doing this. Yeah, 14. They've hit 13 doubles, 2 triples. Slugging 775 as a team. That's insane.
My goodness.
But the story's Wes Clark, right? Because he had one of those years. Well, he had a ton of homers a year ago. I want to say maybe 8 and 60 at bats or something like that. And you're going, okay, is that just a small sample size fluke where they get in the league and it's going to come down to earth? And we don't know that answer yet, right? But I mean, this kid is killing it. He's got 6 home runs and 13 at bats. He's putting up a Barry Bonds line here, circa the year that he hit 77 home runs. He's been walked 7 times. He's got a 23.08 slugging. I mean, we knew that they could hit. Andrew Eister, another guy. But man, this team has just murdered it.
Yeah, no, I
mean 4 games in, and not the opposition they're going to see. Dayton, although I think Dayton was picked near the top of the A10 for whatever that's worth. Not a team that I think we expected to come in and just push Carolina to the brink. But, I mean, again, you can only play what's in front of you. And the bats were the thing that a lot of people pin their hopes on. You were talking about Tennessee and South Carolina. It's kind of pick your flavor.
Yeah.
Some people had Tennessee in that 3 spot. Some people had Carolina in that 3 spot. And then there was drop to Georgia, I think was a consensus 5. And then you've got Kentucky and Missouri, the last 2. I think a lot of people had Missouri. I would certainly flip that at this point. We'll get to the Tigers too in the disappointing section. But again, I want to see more, but you can't do much more than that. Oh, by the way, pitching, I think their arms seem like they're getting back to what I'm not going to call it vintage Carolina when they were winning those titles and you just couldn't hit them, period. And they had 10 guys who could come at you and not a lot of a drop off. But again, kind of a committee thing for the Gamecocks. They get a really good start out of Thomas Farr, who's one of their main arms. Brett Carey closes out a big game for them. 54 strikeouts for them so far in 36 innings, 18 walks. So again, I think I perceive the pitching is a little bit more of a question than hitting for Carolina. So good start for them on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, he combined the home runs and the strikeouts, and I mean, yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of home runs at that park over the years, but that's still. I mean, that's a heck of a start. And I guess certainly we probably learn a little bit more this weekend. They play Clemson this weekend, the 3-game series. I think there. So, I mean, I assume we probably find out a little bit more about maybe what to make of South Carolina. And I mean, what was Clemson's probably a kind of a middle of the pack ACC type team. I want to say.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not vintage
yeah,
Clemson. I don't think they made the top 25s in most polls. So it might be a team that struggles to get to a regional, but certainly a step up in competition.
Yeah, so maybe again maybe we see kind of what South Carolina does in this 3-game set this weekend, and maybe learn a little bit more. But no matter what, when you can put up 12 runs in first 4 games and hit as many home runs and have as many strikeouts they did, you'll take that start any day of the week. So
Auburn, one of the last of the undefeated teams that we've discussed, maybe the last. But Presbyterian not a powerhouse opponent first week, and Auburn just kind of did what we thought it would do, take care of business, and then won a midweek game on top of that. The Tigers, we knew the infield was going to hit right, and we knew that you got guys in Stephen Williams and Judd Ward in the outfield. Williams has gotten off to, I don't want to call it a slow start. He's got a 471 on base, but he's not driven the ball yet like he's capable. Ward's got a couple of bombs for them. The Sunday game, I saw a little bit of that. Rankin Woley leads that one off with a double in a tie game and comes around to score, just beats a throw and a hit. Cody Greenhill, I guess, maybe the story for me. I wanted to see how he would go in a start. He went 5, gave up 3, 2 earned, struck out 6, walked 1. When you're moving a guy out of the bullpen into a starting role, and bullpen's where he's usually pitched, I was kind of anxious to see how he did that. I don't remember if he started some games last year, but I know that College World Series team a couple years ago, I remember him as a bullpen guy. Richard Fitz had a really good start for them. He's a guy that a lot of people think is a mid-first rounder, goes 5, strikes out 6, gives up a run. Again, I don't know that there's really anything out of line with Auburn here that we weren't expecting. The run total is pretty impressive, scoring 40 and giving up 7, but nothing really jumps off the page with me with the Tigers other than to really see how Greenhill handled that start. I think he did pretty well.
yeah, probably the same. Well, not exactly the same as we said. We kind of talked about South Carolina and where kind of they're at in the mix, but I know Auburn has the Round Rock Classic this weekend. Actually, of course, that starts on Friday. They've got Oklahoma, Baylor, and then they've got A&M in there. So that should be fun. I think and that's what I keep saying. Like it's just being able to watch a mix of different teams right now, and just being able to kind of see what stands out. I think when you watch the games against Presbyterian versus watching this 3-game set that a team like Auburn's going to have this weekend, that's where I think you're able to maybe feel a little bit more confident in what you think about certain teams. Even though, like we said, I mean, we know those teams that are at the top right now. Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, teams like that. We feel like we have a pretty good grasp on what they could be this season, what the potential strengths are, what maybe could be a couple of things could hold them back. But then you have teams like Auburn. You're just kind of sitting back and saying, all right, let's wait until maybe we see what happens against, again, like these 3 games are going to have coming up. They play Alabama A&M again today, actually on Wednesday. But heading into the weekend, I think, again, we look at some of those other teams, as we said, we can only take so much away, but maybe we can take a little bit more away after this weekend.
All right, now is when we start to wade into disappointing territory a little bit. And I think I'm going to go with least disappointing. I give Georgia a little bit of a pass because they had Ryan Webb and Jonathan Cannon both out. And I think those are just temporary. But when you lose your 1 and 2 starters to start the weekend, and C.J. Smith is an experienced third, and he threw pretty well. Although that was the game that Georgia lost, was that opener against Evansville. So I give Georgia a pass. They came out 3-1. Evansville's not a pushover a lot of years, but the concern I had with the Bulldogs was hitting, and I don't think I feel any differently about Georgia after this weekend. You just looked up and down the lineup, and there wasn't a lot of proven names in that lineup, guys that have hit before. And look, that's not that's not Georgia's bread and butter. It's better teams lately. It's been done on the pitching side, but man, I hope Georgia would plate more than 19 runs in 4 games.
Yeah, you would have liked to see that a little bit more in terms of what they did. But I mean, I don't know. Like I honestly I didn't get a chance to watch much of Georgia, and like you said, because I think you just kind of look at it and say, well, I don't know. Like they're another one where I don't know exactly what you take away from it, but knowing that they didn't score more than 7 runs in any of those 4 games, maybe that is something. But also maybe they're kind of another team. I know. They had kind of, going into the season, they felt like they'd be able to kind of lean on, those starters at the top. But, beyond that, I mean, are they going to be able to, let's say, have the hitting to be able to, counter those teams? Like we said, the pitching of a Vanderbilt or an Ole Miss or an Arkansas or, any of those teams like that. Are they going to be able to do that enough consistently to be able to score enough runs in this league in particular? I guess that's the big question with Georgia right now.
I guess the next one, I wanted LSU to be better than what 2-1 after 3 games. The Air Force loss was kind of a shock because Air Force hadn't beaten a top 10 team in I think since 2010, and that's not a team that you ever seen a regional. I can't remember the last time the Falcons made one. Now, LSU kind of got it right against Louisiana Tech. Just really poured it on late in that one. But again, that's a team that I need to see them a little bit more. Jaden Hill is kind of the headliner of that bunch. And his first start, let me look at this. He went 4, struck out 5, gave up 3 hits. I was hoping to see him go a little bit longer, but it didn't happen. Landon Marceau was really good for them. In one of their wins, I think Marceau pitched in one of their wins. I'm getting my games mixed up, but in any case, LSU was really surprised to see the Tigers drop a game to Air Force.
The way they lost that game was pretty ugly.
Oh yeah, bullpen collapse, right? Yeah,
that's what happened. I was going to say that is one of the things I had on my notes from the weekend was I think they walked in. I think they were up a run. They walked in 2. So then Air Force, I think, was up 5-4 after that, and then they got another run added on to it. So I think that was another one where we talked about kind of the trends of the week. That was, giving up 3 runs in the ninth, giving away what should have, been a win. And I think they had 3 errors in that game, too, for LSU. So that was one that probably left LSU fans kind of scratching your head. But no doubt, that was one of the more disappointing games probably the weekend just because of the way it played out, not unlike the game with Florida and Miami. So,
well, one thing I did want to watch, Dylan Cruz was one of the more highly touted freshmen in this league. And some would argue that maybe they thought he would have more impact than any player in the league. First weekend, he goes 583. 688, 1.083 for the slugging, hits a couple home runs. So that's one thing. I want to see the rest of their lineup hit a little better. Although I look down, I mean, it's not like they were bad, but I just feel like that's a team that I wanted to see more last year, right? You go into the season, and like if you'd known that COVID was going to be a thing, I'm probably watching a little bit more baseball just to get a glimpse at these kids. But
right.
You think, who cares on some of these throwaway weekend series? I want to see these teams play SEC teams. We never got to that. I want to see these guys like DiGiacomo, Cade Beloso, if these guys are some of the hitters that LSU's had in years past, and I just don't feel like I have a grasp on that yet.
Yeah, I'm with you in terms of, I think, because it is, I mean, it's not easy to forget, but I think it is kind of, it's become such a habit every single year. It's like, okay, like we think back to what happened last season. Like, what can we take away from last season in this specific, sport or for this specific team or anything like that? But it's so still crazy to me to think back and be like, well, what can we take away from last season? Because we didn't get to see a lot of we didn't get to see a lot of these guys and see them against the top competition in the SEC against each other. And so that, I think, makes it much harder to judge kind of what are going to be some of those things that again, can separate some of these teams because we haven't really seen these teams play against each other for the most part in quite a while now. And again, that still just blows my mind in terms of, how long it's really been at this point, because, like we all kind of talked about how long last year felt like, but just in terms of baseball, it's like, man, we just don't have the sample size because it's been so long since we've seen these teams against each other.
Well, to that, the thing that I would have put the most money on is that Florida was going to be really good.
Yeah.
And they end up really, frankly, disappointing the first 4 games. Again, a lot of season left, but it just I'm looking forward to seeing more games, and we kept an eye on a lot. Of course, we had basketball to keep an eye on too, which made it more difficult, which we're going to get to that in a little bit too. Let's see, who are we leaving out at this point? A&M and Missouri.
Yeah, those are the only two, I think.
My goodness, Missouri just got bludgeoned at Grand Canyon. I think that there was a lot of hope that they had some arms there. It just didn't materialize. To me, Missouri is leaving the weekend where I thought. I thought they were probably the 14th of the 14 teams in league, with Kentucky being 13. And the problem with Missouri is I think that the gap with them and the rest of the league is going to be greater than I perceived. But Missouri is just not hit since it's been in the league for the most part. And they collect arms, and they do a pretty good job of patching it together and finding an ace like a TJ Sycamore like they had in 19. But, man, when the pitching failed there and the hitting didn't hit at Grand Canyon, and Grand Canyon's not a bad team, right? That was just not something I expected. I thought Missouri would at least come out even in that, and it didn't. And the other one was A&M, which, again, was the team that I just did not have a handle on at all. And A&M doesn't hit till game 3. And I watched probably the first 5 innings of Saturday night's game. Xavier had a lefty whose name escapes me, but he was a preseason all-conference guy, and he just kept them off balance all day. And then the Aggies go and complicate things by losing a game to Abilene Christian on Tuesday. So you do see some teams start slowly in the league, but given the meat grinder it's going to be, particularly this year, if you got a slow start, you got about 3 weeks to get it right before league play hits. And the Aggies, Missouri, the team I'm most worried about, I just don't think got the horses. I think the Aggies might, but that wasn't what I hoped to see out of the gate.
Yeah, you look at just for Missouri. I mean, they had a lot of errors. I think they scored. I want to say they scored half their runs, at least in those 3 games that they lost to Grand Canyon. They scored them in the night, so it wasn't like they just did not play well for a pretty long stretch in that series, and certainly coming out 1-3, that kind of hammers that home. But yeah, I mean, though, you kind of look at the Aggies, like you said, it was, Xavier, not a bad team, but it's just, Texas A&M did not play well. That's another one like you. I got to see a little bit, and again, I'm not going to remember what day it was, but I know it was one of the games that they were losing, which, there were 3 of them, but I got to see a little bit of it, and they just, they were struggling and just could not seemingly get anything going. I want to say that was actually the Saturday game, too, which they lost 2-0, and they just could not get anything going with the bats. And then, like you said, just not great starts for those 2 teams. And, as I mentioned with Arkansas, or not Arkansas, who was it? Auburn? I can't remember which team. Auburn. They play in the Round Rock Classic this weekend. So maybe for the Aggies, they'll need to kind of get things back on track, too. They're pretty quickly heading into the weekend.
Did you see A&M Saturday game by chance?
I want to say, well, let's see, Saturday's game, that was
Saturday night. It was the night game.
Yeah, it was the 2-0 game, right? Xavier won 2-0. Was that that game? Yeah, that's part of the game. I didn't get to see the whole game, but that's the 1-2 that I got a chance to see a lot of games on Saturday. So for whatever reason, that's when I called a lot of the SEC games. So
that one had some baseball comedy to it. The win was just giving people fits.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that is the one I watched.
I've never been to that stadium, but apparently the dynamic is, I guess there's a grandstand along the first base side, and that roof, I guess if the ball gets over top of the roof, the wind can get pretty vicious. And you would see Xavier fielders go over towards the line and stop, go over thinking a ball was going to go in the stands. and all of a sudden the ball would hit the ground 10 feet behind them. I
Yeah.
mean, you really saw some weird things with the weather in the first weekend that made good ball players look silly. But I think the announcers in that one were having a little bit of fun with that one. I think we've hit everybody in baseball, haven't we?
Yep, that's everyone.
All right, let's talk hoops. Um, our game plan last night, I called you. I said, well, Blake, um, we got two games going on at the same time. Do you want to take LSU and I'll take Florida or vice versa? You see, I don't think it's going to matter because Auburn's without Sharif Cooper. So I don't give that one much of a shot at being a game. And lo and behold, the LSU Georgia game was more lopsided, but not the way we thought.
Yeah, this is a wild night. It was the underdogs went 3-0 on the night in SEC basketball. I mean, that's just what the league is this season. I'm telling you, at this point, we're going to see Alabama and Arkansas play on Wednesday night. Beyond that, I don't trust anyone. Like, I don't trust anybody else. There's just no way you can. I spent, what was it? You and I were talking. I said, man, that LSU team, they're so good on offense, and I could really see them maybe doing some damage in the tournament. And then all of a sudden they come out and they just basically get blown out at Georgia. And then, for Auburn, I picked them to beat Florida, but of course that was with Sharif Cooper. Without Sharif Cooper, they just could not do anything. They really struggled. And this was just a night where, what does it say about Florida? I don't think we learned anything about Florida winning that game at Auburn. What do we learn about LSU? I think that just LSU just cannot be trusted. They're good on offense, but they are just not going to play defense to the level that's going to help them win games in tournament settings. And then, also Missouri. What are they doing? Like, we thought that they had figured some things out. Ole Miss was off the bubble. Well, what do we know? Now Ole Miss probably creeping back towards the bubble. They win at Ole Miss. Missouri just did not play well. Just a crazy night in SEC basketball.
Well, I feel like the league is just stuck in this loop of good but not great.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think we had some hope, man. I mean, because coming into this year, if you know Alabama is going to be what Alabama winds up being, you're going game on, okay? And if you know Arkansas is going to take a step towards being a top 25 team, I think we're sitting here going, okay, this is the year, right? Because Kentucky's going to be Kentucky, and Tennessee is as close to a sure thing to be a top 10 team as anything in this league. And we've talked about those teams and their struggles. You look down at Florida. I guess the thing that hurt too is, of course, the Keontae Johnson injury. But man, I think if I know that Alabama and Arkansas are feeling or are going to be playing as well as they are, I think this is the year the league did it and took that step right. And it hasn't been that at all. We sit here. It seems like we go through these cycles where we feel like we're a little bit encouraged and, hey, there's 6 teams in and these are all top 7 seeds, and Alabama could be a 1, and Arkansas is making a charge, and Tennessee's getting it together. And then it feels like a podcast or two later, we're right back in this spot.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And I thought this could be, I think 2018-19 was the best the SEC's been in a while. That's where you had LSU won the regular season title. Kentucky, Tennessee were both number 2 seeds. Auburn was a 5 seed. Mississippi State was a 5 seed. Like that was a pretty good season where you had a lot of teams at the top that felt pretty strong. I just don't think you have that. I mean, I think it's Alabama and Arkansas, and I think it's everyone else at this point. And that's to say, like, I think Arkansas's earned that spot now based on the streak they've had here over the past month or so. But really, outside of Alabama, like, it's just you just don't have that strength, I think, with these other teams. And, that's where I think several years ago we thought, when that particular year, we thought, okay, all these teams could win a couple games in the tournament. I just don't feel that way about this group. For Missouri, we talked about it with Rocco on Tuesday's episode of the podcast. I mean, for Missouri, their metrics, and you and I have talked about this before too, their resume and their metrics, like the metrics are not big fans of Missouri, and it looks like the metrics are getting it right because I think now in KenPom they've dropped to 51st. I'd have to look at the other numbers and such, but they're at 500 in the league now, and as we said, this is it's a decent league, but it's not as strong as probably I projected it to be. And so they're sitting there just not in a great spot. And I think they're still going to get in the tournament. I think they're going to be fine because Ole Miss is at least trying to make a move. I mean, Ole Miss has moved up to, what is it? I think they're sixth in the SEC now, just in terms of their win total. But I don't know. Like it's a league that may get 6 teams in. Maybe Ole Miss joins the group at 7. But outside of the top 2, I don't really have many high expectations for the rest.
All right, we've done Xavier Wheeler a disservice.
Yes, we have.
That kid got a triple-double on Tuesday night, and we are over an hour into this podcast and have not mentioned his name yet. That kid, was it 14 points? Well, I've got it right in front of me. I would pay to read the box score. He goes 14 points, 13 assists. That's crazy, and 11 boards. Smallest kid on the floor gets 11 boards in 37 minutes. That's the first triple-double in Georgia history.
5'10", 180 is his measurements there. And we've talked about this guy this season. And he has kind of been that breakout player that they needed to be able to win some games. And that's the thing. If you look up, like Georgia's 14-9. They're 7-9 in the SEC. Like they're not that far away from actually, a couple things here or there go the other way. Like I think we're probably talking about Georgia in the NCAA tournament conversation, which is, I know, crazy to think about, but like think about some of the games they've lost this season. They lost that overtime game at LSU in early January. They could have easily won that one. Even some of the others, like they played pretty well at home against Florida. They had some chances against, I know they had to rally, but like they had some chances at Florida too. So a couple different games go their way. I think Georgia's sitting right there with, in the conversation. But Xavier Wheeler, man, he is really good. And I'm with you. I don't know that anyone has talked about him enough this season in terms of what he's brought to the table for this team. But the Tom Crean thing, a lot of people like to kind of sometimes throw this guy under the bus for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know that I completely understand it, but I get the comparisons to Mark Fox and all that, but I still think this guy's a really good coach, and I think he's done a really good job with this particular team down the stretch. Now, obviously, they didn't want to start the season the way they did, 0-4 in the league, but they played some good teams, too, in that stretch. I've actually been pretty impressed with Georgia here. They've played pretty well outside of that game at Alabama here over the past month or so.
I didn't think Georgia was experienced as it is. They're 152 in KenPom in experience. And I look at this team and I just think young, but I guess there's a little bit of hidden game experience here that Justin Kier is probably part of it too, right? He's the senior transfer. He's a new name. So I look down the list and I'm looking sophomores. I think that's where they pick up some. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're Tom Crean, you're looking at this team and you're going, I got a lot of these kids back. I mean, I don't think any of these kids are NBA prospects anytime soon. You got Wheeler with 2 more years. You've got Katie Johnson, whose dunk is the one that gave Wheeler the triple-double last night. He gets 21. He's a freshman. So all of a sudden you've got some pieces here. And so I think there is some cause for some optimism in Athens.
Yeah, I think so. And look, traditionally, like say what you want, but like that traditionally has not been an easy place to win. And I know maybe on the surface you can say, well, it's Georgia, you can recruit Atlanta, you can do all these things, but like, I mean, really, like it hasn't been that easy for coaches, I think, over the years to turn Georgia into a basketball powerhouse. And so that is something I would also keep in the back of my mind is, this isn't, yes, you can get there. Like it's certainly possible, but I just think that even when he took over, like I thought Mark Fox did a pretty good job there overall, but this was still a program that was going to need a little time, I think, to be able to jump into that top tier and maybe even be there regularly. I know they haven't kind of made that jump yet that people wanted to see, but that they're building some things there. And I think it's just a matter of, I think Georgia's going to give him time. Like they're not going to be running this guy out the door. But I think if they give him enough time, I think that they'll be able to probably make some strides. It's just, it's not easy to do in this conference, which we've said, so many times at this point.
You've coached basketball. Why can't LSU defend?
I don't know. I'm telling you, and I don't, listen, I don't like calling out college kids and all this other thing. It's just, I get it. Like sometimes you just get teams that don't, but like they just don't. I don't know what it is. Like the gear is different on the offensive side of the court than it is on the defensive side of the court. And like there were times last night where I saw Georgia driving to the lane, and it's just no one there. Like there's just no one like making that next step to get to the person with the ball or to be able to defend a shot. And it was too easy for Georgia at times. And so I don't know what it is either. Like some groups, I guess, just are not good defensive teams, but this has kind of been a theme for LSU since Will Wade's gotten there, which is, interesting to think about because he's a, VCU guy and came from that staff and was there and just all those things. But I don't know. Like they're just not a good defensive team. And I don't know if it's just, I don't know if it's the system. I don't really think it is. I think it's just more of these guys are good offensive players, but there are just times where it looks like they just don't want to play defense. And I don't know that maybe they just don't have enough depth to be able to, sit these guys and say, hey, we're going to turn to these other players because that's usually what a coach would do. We'll just say, you know what, until you play defense, you're going to sit down and not play. But for whatever reason, like they just don't play defense.
Okay, here's a good transition to where I want to go next. Watching LSU and Ole Miss play back-to-back, the contrast is pretty astonishing. I watched the way Ole Miss plays on the perimeter and closes out versus the way LSU does it and the urgency with which the defenders get there, and it's night and day.
Well, and here's something too, and I didn't realize this stat until I looked it up, but LSU is awful at defending inside the three. Like they are 256 nationally in 2-point field goal percentage defense. So teams shoot 52.2% against them. This is a team with pretty good size. I mean, they've got, a lot of length with Watford. Even, all their guards are long, like Cam Thomas is 6'4", Javonte Smart 6'4", Darius Day 6'7". They've got some size, but teams are just getting easy shots inside the lane or inside the three. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's an aggressiveness type of thing. I don't know what LSU's fouling rate is. Like that's another one I think that would be interesting to look up in terms of how often are they fouling? Are they playing aggressive in the lane? Like those are different things that I think would be interesting to kind of look at because of the percentage they're giving up. When the average, they're almost 3% higher than the Division I average when you look at their defense inside the perimeter. So I don't know what it is. They're just not. I don't know that this team just does not have that next gear on defense sometimes. And you can score as much as you want, but at a certain time when you start playing these 90 games, your offense, you're not going to score on every possession. So you've got to get some stops somewhere. And they just, they got in too big of a hole here against Georgia.
To be fair to LSU's guards, and I don't think we've been unfair, but just to check a box here at least, I think one difference is Ole Miss has got a rim protector in Ramon White. I don't know if he's an elite one, but he's enough to put some fear into you. And they've got a couple other kids in Buffin and Rodriguez who can block some shots too. And maybe that's effort. I don't know. But it probably does make a difference when you've got guys behind you that you trust a little bit more on the Ole Miss end than you would on the LSU side.
That's a good point because, I mean, let's think about it too. Last year, what when you kind of looked at how this team was built last year for LSU, they won 20-something games last year, but it was sort of similar in that, they were a team that had some size, but they didn't necessarily have, the full rim protection when you looked at kind of how their lineup was built, because Watford still was that guy last year. But, I don't look at Trendon Watford as just this elite defensive player. I look at him as someone that has so much versatility in terms of what he can do on offense. But, I think that's the thing is like they haven't had, and look, Watford's 6'9". That's a big guy, but like they really haven't had maybe that guy that can just do so many different things and affect the game in so many different ways than when they had Naz Reid a couple of years ago, which is that team I was talking about, 2018-19. They went 28-7. They won the SEC title. That was the difference for that team because they were still really good on offense, but they had someone like Reid in there. And even had, Cavell Bigby Williams, who was 6'11", 250. So he was someone else that could kind of protect the paint. And they just don't have that. And I think they're just giving up too many easy shots inside the lane.
For Missouri, I'm fearing that we're seeing the answer, that this team just isn't as good as the net and some other things and the big wins would suggest. And I think the place where they really fell short last night, and again, they got a lot of guys who can step up, but when Xavier Pinson goes 1 for 9 and scores 2 points, it's going to be hard for them to win.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to do much with that. And I mean, look, Ole Miss is a good defensive team. We've said it so many times. That's their strength, but you're just not going to do a lot when Pinson has 2 points. It's just they're not good enough team offensively. We thought that coming into the season. We didn't think this was going to be an elite offensive team. They've been better than we expected, but I just think that they still got to have him. I mean, they had balance elsewhere, but it wasn't enough. And yeah, this it's I don't know, like it's crazy to think this team beat Illinois, they beat Oregon. They've got a lot of good wins on their resume, but they're losing to some teams that they shouldn't be losing to. But you know what? Good win for Ole Miss because they're getting closer. I thought that it was gonna take them winning out in the regular season to be right there again, but this was the biggest step they could take, knowing that they've still got Vanderbilt and Kentucky left, at least as it sits right now. But this was the biggest win they could have gotten, and so that's significant for Ole Miss.
I feel like we didn't learn much from Florida or Auburn either. I mean, I think once you know that Auburn's going to be without its star player, then that game takes on a different turn, even on the road. I mean, I guess Trey Mann was really good, 19 and 13. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what we got out of that one. I mean, Florida got a win that it really needed. I guess there's that, but I don't feel like anything out of that game was a real revelation to us last night.
No, I think Saturday's game is where we learn more about Florida when they play Kentucky. I just don't think. I don't know of anything we can pretty much take away from that game other than Auburn is just not good without Sharif Cooper. Like that's the thing. And that's the thing. Maybe Auburn's, it's not they're not good. It's just, I mean, maybe they knew he wasn't going to play, but like, it just felt like it's one of those things where wasn't exactly sure until closer to game time. But yeah, they just don't, Auburn doesn't have that next level that we're so used to them seeing on offense or used to them having on offense. Like they've had over the years whenever he's not on the floor. And so this was one where Florida got off to a good start, and without Sharif Cooper, this Auburn team playing from behind, that's not a good thing for them, I think.
Blake, I feel like we covered a lot of ground today between basketball and baseball. I'm working on, I meant to have it up by now, but it got to be so difficult to do that I just stopped and said, I need a fresh set of eyes to finish this up today. I'm working on a piece about all the games that were missed and what the SEC can do about it and how that might shape out that I need to put some more thought into. So that'll be coming up at the site, which you can access at southeastern14.com. But other than that, anything that we didn't get to that's worth a mention today?
No, this is our longest episode ever thus far. But man, we packed in a lot into it. So we appreciate everyone listening because we've got a lot of great feedback thus far, and I just want to say that I really appreciate everyone who's given us some good feedback. And our listens are going up. More people are listening, and that's what we want. And we really appreciate everyone kind of helping us out with everything thus far because it's been a lot of fun to do. And like you said, just being able to spend an hour talking about baseball, basketball, and just cover so much ground, it's pretty awesome. So
yeah, do us a favor, subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Give us a rating if you would, please, and tell a friend. Those 3 things would help us a ton. Anyway, we will be back on Thursday with another episode, mostly talking basketball, light slate of baseball today. Vanderbilt's got a game with Western Kentucky. That's it. But we will hit basketball predominantly on Thursday's episode. Thank you for listening. I'm Chris Lee, the host. He's Blake Lovell. We'll catch you back again on Thursday.